Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, and today what I'm going to talk about is, it's going to be an EJS embedded JavaScript templates masterclass with Express. But first, let's just talk about like what embedded JavaScript templates are. EJS is just one of the many templating languages. Okay, so nowadays you always hear people talk about like React, Vue, Angular, Svelte, Solid.js, which are all front-end frameworks. They give you ways of expressing what the UI will look like from the front end. So essentially, all the construction of the UI happens in the browser. Okay, that's a fairly recent phenomenon. Before there was client-side frameworks like Angular, React, etc., what you did primarily had, and which you still have today, and very much more popular than people realize, is server-side rendering of the UI. Okay, so what the idea is that instead of constructing the UI from the browser, or the bulk of the UI from the browser, you have a process that occurs on the server. And then the server has templates, which could be written in dozens and dozens of different templating languages across many different programming languages. Okay, it can dynamically generate an HTML file. Okay, so think of it like Mad Libs. Okay, so you see Mad Libs, and there's a bunch of like holes that need to be filled in, and every time you fill in the Mad Libs with different words, you end up getting something different. Okay, so if I go to like Amazon website, which I'm pretty sure uses Ruby on Rails, those are generally using ERB templates, which is embedded Ruby templates, which is what Ruby on Rails uses. Um, to generate those templates. And it's generally when you hear like these terms like embedded Ruby, embedded JavaScript, and then to an extent for Python, there's a one called Jinja, like ninja with a J. And then there's like Blade for PHP, and PHP itself has really started out as a templating language that kind of became a full-throated language. Essentially, the idea is you write your HTML and you inject essentially programming in your HTML that then gets processed. And then the output is the final HTML file. That's essentially the idea with templating. So you never send EJS or PHP or ERB to the browser. The browser doesn't know what those things are. The browser only understands HTML. The server processes this and sends the final output. Okay, so let's create an Express application just to kind of show this at work. So let me just close all this stuff up. Okay, and let's just, do the usual npm init-y to create a new npm project. Let's install Express and EJS. Okay, which I may have to just downgrade the 16 real quick. npm install npm use 16, and then do an npm install Express and EJS. Okay, just because for some reason it always hangs when I'm using the newest version of Node. Okay, cool. Now, you have to use specifically the Express framework when using EJS. No, you could actually use other Node frameworks, such as um, uh, Fastify and Koa. They also work with any templating language. But another cool thing you can do with different templating languages is that there's another uh, what's called a static site generator referred to as Eleventy that also works. I'm pretty sure also works with EJS. Okay, so EJS can be used in a lot of different contexts. Let me just double check. 11T, a simpler static site generator. I'm pretty sure it does work with EJS. Let me just see here. Docs. CSS strict. Here we go. Yep. So it works with like EJS and many of the other popular templating languages like Liquid, like Pug, like Nunjux, Handlebars, Mustache, Haml. Haml I haven't used yet. Okay. And what a static site generator is that it basically, instead of having it generate the page on every request, like you have a server like Express, then basically you're generating that HTML every time a user asks for the page. What you're doing is you're pre-generating the pages and then deploying these static pages after the fact. So, and then everyone just keeps getting those static pages. It's just a different approach to the same thing. But again, if you like the feel of EJS, 11T is a pretty cool tool to learn how to use, especially if you're building like your portfolio website or a blog or something like that. So, because you can use EJS or any of these other options in building out that site with 11D. It's pretty cool. Okay, so now that we kind of introduced that, let's go in here. So I'm using, let me just create a server.js and set up a basic Express server. I just won't do anything too fancy, so I'll just say like const app equals um, require Express. I'm just going to literally just do this in one line just to save myself some time. Okay, and then I am going to have the app listen. Just have it listen on port 3000. Again, this is neither here nor there. Console.log listening on 3000. Okay, so there we have our Express app kind of all set up. Okay, and I kind of short circuit some of the traditional steps here just to get to the point, because again, this is not an Express video. This is an EJS video to show you how EJS works. But in the context of Express, the cool thing about using EJS with Express is there's no configuration. You don't have to do any configuration for Express. It just works. Because the way Express works, let's create a route. So app.get, we'll just make it the catch-all route. Really doesn't matter. Rec.res. So when you would use the response.render function in EJS, it will, like, so if I say here we're going to use index.ejs, the way it's going to do is that it's going to look inside a folder called views. That's just the way Express is coded. Like, you're using other frameworks, they may have different defaults. But in Express, it's going to look for a folder called views. So it's going to look inside this folder called views for this index.ejs file. That's the template. Okay, so I got to make sure I create that file, index.ejs in here. But the way Express knows that I'm using EJS is because of the file extension. Okay, if I had handlebars as a file extension, it would then look to see if I have handlebars installed and so forth. Okay, and then it'll know because EJS is literally called EJS. Okay, so that's the beauty of EJS, the way they kind of designed it, is that it fits perfectly with Express. Like, there's literally absolutely zero configuration. If you do want to try other templating languages with Express, if you go to my blog, grokoverflow.com, and you go to my blog here and you look up like templating. Okay, you'll see here intro to Express, and then here it's like a little blog where I go over EJS, handlebars, mustache, and pug, and show you how to use them with Express. So that's a fun thing that's there. And then if I think there's like one other templating article I have on there. Yeah, and here's like intro with Fastify using Liquid. And again, with Fastify, you can also use Liquid, EJS, handlebars, whatever you want. Again, the templating language is just one choice on like deciding how you want to generate your HTML pages. There's different choices. Okay. But generally, when you're working in JavaScript, EJS is going to be a pretty good choice because you can use what you already know. JavaScript. That's the beauty of EJS. You're not learning a new syntax like you would with like Pug or Nunjux, or if you try to use, templating languages that generally aren't used in JavaScript but can be, like Liquid or Jinja or something like that. Generally, they're going to have like a lot of other syntax. And if you're using Jinja, you have to kind of like employ Python in your HTML. And if you're using ERB, you're using Ruby. The beauty here with EJS, you can literally just use JavaScript logic in your HTML to describe what you're doing. So I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so for example, there we have this. So basically, this file is going to render this index.ejs file. What you can do is you can write JavaScript anytime you put this symbol here. So see, like, this is your basic EJS like escape sequence, meaning, hey, anything in between these tags are EJS. And the reason being is that when EJS reads the file, it knows it needs to process. Anytime it sees these, it needs to process that. It needs to turn that into and see, hey, what's going to be the ending result HTML. Okay, so in that case, let's see here. What I want to do is we'll just create like a loop. We'll just create a basic loop. So for I, let I equal 0. long as I is less than 10. And then every time, we're going to add 1 to I. So just traditional, for loop. Okay, so I'm going to put the curly bracket there. So that's the opening curly bracket of my loop. But again, generally, like, there's 2 curly brackets, right? I'm going to put all my stuff here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this up. But I got to make sure I say, hey, this is JavaScript, and this line is JavaScript. In between is going to be the HTML I want to generate on each loop. So I'm going to generate an H1. And I have this variable that I created called I. So notice, again, this is treated as JavaScript. Anytime I use this, it's going to assume that whatever's in between these things is JavaScript. Think about it that way. So basically, this is like the closing curly bracket for my for loop. There's the opening bracket. And in the middle, I can use any variable that exists in this context, which right now, I've created this I variable. So I can be like here, I'm going to put in I. Well, not like that. It would be like equals. So if I want to inject something, I want to add a little equal sign there. So see, notice the difference. In this case, I didn't use the equal sign because I wasn't injecting any text there. But I am injecting text between the H1. So then I can put I. So I'm saying, hey, inject the contents of I here. But again, on each loop, I is going to have a different value. So on the first loop, I is 0, then 1, then 2, then 3. Just a normal for loop. So now let's watch what happens when I run this file. So node server.js. So what's going to happen is that when it renders this file, the EJS library, they're going to run a function that EJS made that's going to read this file first and look for all the EJS and then spit out some HTML. So watch what happens when I go to localhost 3000. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9. Okay, now how does that look like? Well, let me open up DevTools. And if I go to sources and take a look at this index.html here, notice, see, it's no EJS. I don't see any EJS in the file. It's a bunch of H1s. Okay, because it created the HTML file based on my JavaScript logic. Okay, I'm using JavaScript to tell it how to write the HTML file. Okay, that's sort of like the different sort of like thought process here. Okay, the browser never actually sees the EJS. The EJS happens back on the server when it literally writes the file, and then this gets the final HTML file. Okay, so again, you're always going to use this when you want to inject something into the HTML, and you're going to use this when you're generally generating like JavaScript logic. Okay, and the cool thing is you can send data to your EJS templates. So in this function, so if you think of this as like the madlib, the template is the madlib, then the second argument is an object for what you want to have fill in the placeholders. So this object can have any property you want. So we can just say, hey, like nums. Okay, let's create a property called nums. That's an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, because I put this property called nums in this object, that becomes available here. So now I can actually, let's go create another loop. But this time we'll use, and again, you can use any valid JavaScript. So I can now do like nums dot for each using a for each loop, and just like set up my basic for each loop, and just say num index, because again, essentially it's going to loop over the nums array. So for each num in nums, then I can just kind of put enter here, and then again make sure I put in my little EJS hats to make sure I separate the JavaScript from the HTML. So again, this is JavaScript, this is JavaScript, and then in between I can do the HTML and say, hey, for each num, what I want to do is put like an H2 that says, num, because we know that this num variable got created here, and we are inside these curly brackets, so just like normal JavaScript, num is in scope there. Okay, is in index. Okay, and now if I go back and then we refresh the page, what is it like? Nums is not defined. Oh, I have to restart the server. Okay, so let me try that again. Scroll down, see 1 is in index 0. And see, like the HTML here, see the actual HTML is generated is that. That's what the browser sees. The browser has no idea that we put all that JavaScript in that EJS file. because it's going to be pre-processed. The server is processing and generating that HTML on the fly for every request. Okay. And if you were using 11T, you would kind of do it as like a one-time thing. You would sit there and say, okay, hey, I'm done making my templates. Let me hit the button. 11T generates all the pages, and then you would go like deploy it to Netlify or Vercel or something like that. But again, EJS is just a way of expressing certain instructions on how to create the HTML page given X data. Okay, and the cool thing is it's not just loops. I cannot just loop over data. I can create like if statements. Okay, so let's say I don't want to print every number. I only want to print the even numbers. I can be like, again, use my EJS hats. So if num modulo 2 equals 0, so if it's even, then we're going to do this. Okay, again, I'll set up my EJS hats. And then set up my little EJS hat for the closing bracket. Okay, and then instead I'll put this h2 in there. So that way it's part of the if statement. So again, only if this if is true does it actually create that h2. So now watch what happens. You see now there's only 2. Only when num is even did it actually generate. So you can actually generate like all sorts of really interesting logic. You can say, okay, hey, if this is true, show this on the page. If this is kind of like, hey, if this is logged in, this shows up on the page. Okay, and again, that data could be whatever data you want. You can send literally any kind of data here. You could even send functions. Okay, so I can say here, let's say I want to send a function. Okay, we'll just call it double. That just doubles numbers, so that way I can use it in my template. So we'll just say, x equals x times 2. Okay, so I'll just put a comma here. So I'm sending this to the template. Now that becomes available here. So now what I can do is I can be here and it'll be like double num. Okay, and that should work. So I should see double is not defined. Oh, I have to restart the server. Let me just use Notamon. Notamon server.js. There we go. Refresh. And you see here now it's doubling the number, double 2 to 4 and 4 to 8. Okay, because again, it's just basically processing that JavaScript in that scope. Okay, essentially, whatever you put in this object is in scope of the EJS file, plus anything you define in the EJS file. Okay, so but remember, all the EJS, the thing you have to kind of keep in mind when you're writing your HTML is that the EJS JavaScript is being processed at the server level, meaning it's processed before it hits the user's browser. Okay, because you might be writing some client-side JavaScript. Like I might be writing some JavaScript that runs in the client. So I might like put a script tag in here that does like a console.log hello world. This JavaScript here, this is front-end JavaScript. This JavaScript is going to run in the browser. Okay, so if I go over here, okay, and I refresh the page, see that script tag all the way here at the bottom, that is going to make it to the end user. And that JavaScript, see, does run here in the front end. Okay, so there's that whole distinction between back-end JavaScript versus front-end JavaScript. So your EJS stuff is always going to get processed before the user receives the HTML. Anything you put in the script tag gets processed when the user processes the HTML on their client. There's an important distinction because you can't really manipulate, you can't do like DOM manipulation from EJS because EJS is done before the DOM is ever generated. You would then use, the script tag and use like your normal JavaScript DOM manipulation or jQuery to do DOM manipulation after the page is loaded. So you always got to be thinking about like when things are happening. Is this logic that has to happen when I'm generating the page before it loads in the user's browser? Or is this the result of some user interaction after the page is loaded? In that case, I need front-end JavaScript. Okay, so I just want to point that out because especially in like the early days of any web developer, that's always kind of like a tricky leap of kind of like thinking, where is the different code that I'm writing running in the process? And especially when you start working with like static site generators like an 11T or a Gatsby, whatnot, that gets even more complicated because there's like several steps in the process. And you kind of think through, okay, well, this code runs in this point, this code runs in this point. So you got to think through like, okay, if I want this to happen at this point, I got to put this code here. Okay. because you're thinking, hey, what things exist? Like the DOM doesn't exist in the back end. Like EJS has no awareness of the DOM because you're not in the browser yet. So you always got to think through, okay, so if you want code to run in the front end where the DOM exists, after the page is loaded, it's got to be in those script tags, or attach a separate like JavaScript file via a script tag, so that way it runs in the browser. Okay, another thing I want to point out is another really sweet feature of EJS, which is called partials. So for example, I could write a new file, let's say like head.ejs. Okay, and then let's say I want to write like a head, here's a head tag, and I want to add like the Java, like I want to use jQuery, let's say. So code.jQuery.com. I'll copy the script tag so I can bring in jQuery or any other like front end libraries that I like to use, and I can just like paste that right in there. But this way I don't have to type it in every file. What I can do is I can use this command here. So notice that now instead of an equal sign, I'm going to using this dash. Just know this is what you got to do if you want to use this feature. And then I say I want to include, and then you put the path to the file. So in the same folder, there's a file called head.ejs. Okay, and what that's going to do, I put the closing brackets in the parentheses. Okay, what that's going to do is going to take whatever text is inside that head.ejs and inject it right there. So watch what happens. Now if I go refresh the page, okay, it's still all good, but see now jQuery is there, and if I take a look at the index.html, see the head tag is added up the top like it was just in there. Because again, it's generating the HTML file. The beauty of this is that way I don't have to write this head tag every time. So like let's say you have the same header on every page, the same navigation bar on every page. You just have to write one file with the navigation bar and then just include it using this partials feature on each page. This can be really great to keep your pages looking consistent and being able to make updates really easy to the layout of the page without having to like edit every file every time you want to make an update to the design of the page. Okay, and now technically I've included jQuery, so now in that script tag here I could do jQuery stuff. So I can do something like let's say to the body I'd like to append a new h1 with the text of hello world. Okay, and there it is. Well, it should be somewhere. We'll have to refresh the page, but it froze. Why did it freeze? There we go. Oh, okay. Localhost 3000. And so you see that hello world. Okay, so now again, if I open DevTools, see the original HTML file does not have that h1 at the end. So you see like that h1 that says hello world is not there because that was generated by the front end code. So the HTML file was read, the DOM was generated, and then the jQuery code we put in the script tag then appended that h1 to the DOM, not to the file. So again, just to kind of clarify the difference in what's happening, EJS determines how the HTML file is written. Your front end code, aka like something like a jQuery or just plain vanilla DOM manipulation or React or whatever, that's going to determine what's happening once this all loads up in the browser. Okay, so again, that distinction between back-end code and front-end code, back-end code and front-end code. Okay, and again, the easiest way to think about it is that if it's between some script tags or it's a file attached via a script tag, that is front-end code that will run when the browser loads. If it's EJS, meaning it's between these things, it's going to run before the page loads, okay, on the server. So it's going to have access to the data that you passed here. But literally anything you can think of JavaScript wise, and again, you can create your own custom functions that have your own custom logic that you can pass in. What you can do, you can use to help create your templates and help generate your HTML. So really, like the possibilities are limitless. Anything you can just imagine, like, okay, well, I want the page to be generated this way when these things are the case, and you just send down the data that's necessary and write the logic that's necessary to write the page that you want. Okay, it does require like a little imagination. You kind of have to imagination, like imagine what are the things that change, and that's why it's always good to take some time and do some planning. But the power of like server-side templating, and templating is making a real comeback lately, or like the idea of whole server-side rendering. Like now, like you see like Next.js and Remix.js really moving a lot more to like server-side rendering. So like React, which started out as like a big client-side framework, is now moving more towards server-side rendering. So server-side rendering with using tools like EJS is making a big comeback. Not that it ever went away. I mean, PHP still heavily like PHP-based websites, Ruby-based websites, Python-based websites still heavily rely on server-side rendering like this. But this is generally how you would do it in JavaScript. And EJS is a really good choice when it comes to doing that kind of templating in JavaScript because you do get the full power of JavaScript in designing your HTML, which is really, really useful. So my name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.com. Hopefully this gives you a better idea of how you can use, but again, bottom line, it just comes down to thinking how would I express what I want to express in JavaScript. So it's not having to learn a whole new language. You're just taking a language you already know and using it to explain how you want your HTML to be generated. So you just think about what, anything that's built in the JavaScript is going to be automatically there, and anything that's not automatically built in the JavaScript, you like certain variables, certain functions that you might have created, you can always just send here in the object that you send over to mix with a template when you do that render. So I'll leave it at that. My name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Have a great day and enjoy.